There once was a father named Eliam who had two sons. At 62 years old, with his silver-gray shoulder-length hair and full, well-kept beard catching the soft morning light, he loved them both more than the stars in the sky, more than the crops in his fields, more than his own breath. His eldest son, Asher, a tall, muscular man of 26 with serious, deep-set brown eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, was dutiful and hard-working, always by his side in the olive groves. His younger son, Nadav, just 19, with a slim, athletic build, wild dark brown curls, and restless hazel eyes, was always staring at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond the Judean hills. One morning, Nadav came to his father with a request that pierced the old man's heart like a sword. The young man stood there in his fine blue linen tunic and embroidered vest, unable to meet those warm brown eyes that had always looked at him with such love. He shifted his weight in his new leather sandals, his hands fidgeting with the strap of his travel bag. "Father," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the stone floor, "give me my share of the inheritance now. I don't want to wait." Eliam's oval face, weathered by the sun, went pale. The deep laugh lines around his eyes deepened with a pain that seemed to age him in an instant. In their culture, such a request was a brutal declaration, meaning only one thing: "I wish you were dead." It was a son saying he couldn't bear to wait for his father to pass away to claim what was his. Micah, the head servant, a short, stocky man of 48 with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, gasped when he overheard from the doorway, his round face frozen in disbelief. Asher, who was mending a fence nearby, heard the words and his square jaw dropped in fury, his broad shoulders tensing as he gripped his tools. But Eliam, with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks into his silver beard, simply nodded slowly. He looked at his youngest son, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. "If this is what you want, my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "then it shall be done." Within days, the father divided his property. Nadav took his portion, a heavy purse of silver coins, without a word of thanks or a backward glance. He walked away from the stone house, the olive trees, and the only family he had ever known, his heart set on a distant, glittering promise. Nadav traveled for weeks, the dust of Judea giving way to the paved roads of a bustling Greek city in a far country. The world he entered was a whirlwind of bright colors and new sounds. The streets were crowded with merchants shouting in foreign tongues, the air thick with the smell of exotic spices and roasting meat. He found a tavern run by a tall, heavy-set innkeeper, a Greek man of 55 with a bald head and small, unimpressed gray eyes. The innkeeper, wearing a stained white tunic and a leather apron, barely glanced at Nadav, simply taking his coins and pointing him to a room. For a time, Nadav lived like a prince. He traded his simple blue tunic for an expensive crimson silk robe and polished leather boots. He wore gold rings on his fingers and spent his father's money without a second thought. The nights were a blur of glowing lamps, flowing wine, and the laughter of new, fair-weather friends who were drawn to his wealth like moths to a flame. He feasted, he gambled, and he chased every pleasure the city had to offer, believing he had finally found true freedom. He never once thought of the quiet farm, the scent of olive blossoms, or the gentle face of his father. But fortunes built on recklessness are as fleeting as the morning mist. A severe famine swept through the far country, and work became scarce. Nadav's money, which had once seemed endless, dwindled until his purse was empty. His so-called friends vanished, their laughter replaced by the cold, hard stares of creditors. The innkeeper, whose expression never changed, threw him out onto the street when he could no longer pay. Stripped of his fine crimson robe, Nadav now wore a torn gray tunic that barely held together. His ornate belt was gone, his polished boots sold for a crust of bread. He was hungry, alone, and desperate. In his despair, he found work with a local pig farmer, a thin, wiry Syrian man of 40 with greasy, shoulder-length hair and a crooked nose. The farmer, with his narrow green eyes and dismissive scowl, didn't ask questions. He just pointed to the muddy pens and grunted, "Feed the pigs." The environment was filthy, the air thick with the stench of mud and waste. Under the harsh, dusty light, Nadav's slim frame grew gaunt. He was so hungry, he found himself staring at the carob pods the pigs were eating, his stomach twisting with a gnawing emptiness. He was lower than the servants in his father's house, who always had more than enough to eat. It was there, in the filth and despair of the pig pen, that Nadav finally came to his senses. The memory of his home, once a prison he had to escape, now seemed like a paradise. He remembered the kindness in his father's warm brown eyes, the smell of fresh bread from their ovens, the loyalty of the servants like Micah. Shame washed over him, so powerful it brought him to his knees in the mud. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice cracking. He realized his father's servants lived better than he did. He had sinned against heaven and against his father. He was no longer worthy to be called his son. A flicker of hope, fragile but persistent, sparked in his heart. He would go back. He would fall at his father's feet and beg not to be a son, but to be hired as a servant. That was all he deserved. With newfound resolve, he stood up, turned his back on the pigs, and began the long journey home. He was barefoot, his clothes in rags, his body thin and weak, but for the first time in months, he was walking toward life, not away from it. Meanwhile, back in Judea, Eliam had never stopped watching. Every single day, the old father would walk to the edge of his property, his sturdy form a familiar silhouette against the setting sun, and scan the horizon. He would stand there for hours, his heart aching with a constant, quiet hope, his silver-gray hair blowing in the breeze. The head servant, Micah, would watch him from a distance, his own heart heavy for his master's grief. Asher, ever practical, would scowl, his expression stern. "He is gone, father," he would say, his voice rough. "Forget him. He is dead to us." But Eliam would just shake his head, his warm brown eyes fixed on the empty road. "He is my son," he would reply softly. "He will come home." Then one afternoon, while Nadav was still a long way off, a speck appeared on the horizon. Eliam's eyes, though old, were sharp. He recognized the walk, the shape of the head, the familiar gait, even from such a distance. It was him. It was his son. A surge of pure, unadulterated joy and compassion flooded the father's heart, erasing all the pain and worry of the past months. He didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. He gathered his robe and began to run. The 62-year-old man ran with the speed of a youth, his silver beard flying, his sandals kicking up dust. Micah's jaw dropped, and even Asher stopped his work, stunned at the sight of his dignified father running like a man possessed. He had practiced his speech 1,000 times, but now, seeing his father charging toward him, the words caught in his throat. He prepared himself for anger, for rejection, for the cold shoulder he so richly deserved. But instead, he was swept into a powerful embrace. His father's arms wrapped around him, holding him tight. Eliam was weeping, his tears of joy falling onto Nadav's matted, curly hair. He kissed his son's dirty, tear-streaked face again and again, his voice choked with emotion. My son, my son." Nadav finally found his voice, burying his face in his father's shoulder. "Father," he sobbed, "I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But Eliam wasn't listening. He cut him off, turning to the servants who had run to catch up. "Quick," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority and celebration. "Bring the best robe, my fine purple and blue striped one, and put it on him. Put a gold signet ring on his finger and new leather sandals on his feet. And you, Micah, go and prepare the fattened calf. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The entire household erupted into a flurry of joyous activity, the air filled with music and laughter as the celebration began. Grace had found the runaway, and a father's love had brought him home. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to be better. See you next time.